Entrepreneurs and the decisions they make, right here on The Leadership Voice. Welcome to The Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show features entrepreneurs and the strategic choices that they make. Joining us today will be Terry Giles, Chairman and CEO of Giles Enterprises, and Tom Sims, Chairman and CEO of Sims Restaurants. We also have a special leadership lesson being delivered by Professor Lorenzo Bizzi. But let's start things off with today's quote of the day. Today's quote comes from E.E. Cummings. Always the beautiful answer who asks a more beautiful question. Although I'm sure E.E. Cummings was not writing this to entrepreneurs, it certainly provides words by which to live, especially when trying to garner valuable information from customers or your team. Our first guest today on The Leadership Voice is Terry Giles. Terry grew up from humble means and attended 21 different schools in a 10-year period in his life. He earned a debate scholarship en route to earning his bachelor's degree from Cal State Fullerton, and later pursued his law degree from Pepperdine. He also served this great country in the U.S. Army from 1970 to 1976 during the Vietnam conflict. One of Southern California's most esteemed litigators, Terry Giles founded a large West Coast law firm and later bought a small Toyota dealership and built it up to become one of the highest volume dealerships in the world. He went on to establish or acquire over 35 businesses and has experience in law, automobiles, banking, food, entertainment, intellectual property, and more. In 1994, Terry Giles received the Horatio Alger Award, given each year to individuals that have overcome great odds to achieve great successes. He gives back to the community, and this philanthropy has featured a strong commitment to education. In 2009, he was the founding benefactor that funded the creation of the Center for Leadership in Mahalo College of Business and Economics. So it is with great pleasure to welcome to The Leadership Voice, Terry Giles.
Great to see you, Jay, and always nice to be back on campus.
It's great to have an alum of the Titan family here on the show. Terry, maybe we could start off if you could share some of your major career highlights that sort of brought you from your early days as an attorney up until your more recent activities.
Well, it's been an interesting journey. I started off starting my own law firm out of law school. I wanted to be a criminal trial lawyer. I thought that was real law. And I guess maybe because I grew up on Owen Marshall and Perry Mason, that's how I wanted to do it. We had a lot of good fortune. In 8.5 years, we built the largest criminal practice in California. We were making over 600 court appearances a month. In that 8.5 years, I tried 90 cases to verdict, including 13 murder cases, 3 death penalty cases. It all went swimmingly until I represented a guy named Fred Douglas. Fred was accused of killing 9 women. I got lucky the way things broke in the trial. Fred got acquitted, and then 6 months later, he killed 2 more girls. And I couldn't figure out why the world was a better place because I did what I did for a living. And so I quit. The surprise for me was twofold. First, I was walking away from something I'd always wanted to do. And secondly, I realized that the firm had no value once I left. In fact, it fell apart in 6 months because it was a service business. So I decided, I built this company called a law firm, and I didn't know what I was doing when I did that. Why couldn't I do that somewhere else? Only this time, if a truck ran over me, I'd hoped people would come to the funeral, but I didn't want the business to lose a dime's worth of value. And that's when I started my business career. And it was fantastic. And then 4 or 5 years in the business career, a gentleman came to me who was in trouble on a civil case. He was a wonderful man, a wonderful cause, and he funded me to put together a small firm to prepare and try that one case, which I did. And they wrote a book about it called Once Upon a Time in Computerland. And then I started my civil career, and I went on and tried 60 civil cases to verdict while I was doing my businesses. And I finished up in 2008. I represented 150 of the 800 victims in California in what became known as the Catholic predator priest cases. And then from there, I found myself using my law degree, not in representing cases or being in trial, but in helping situations, family situations mostly. I was brought in as a trustee for the Martin Luther King estate to bring peace to the siblings of Martin and Coretta King. I'm currently handling and consulting with one of the families that owns one of the Major League Baseball teams and assisting them in transforming their assets. And so there's been 4 separate, distinct careers over my lifetime, and I feel like the luckiest guy in the world.
Oh, that's amazing. When you think about the different investments you've made, and you've worked or you've invested or divested in 35 different companies, when you think about the many investments, high leverage decisions that you've had to make through the years, could you share with us, how did you know when it was time to take action, when it was time to buy, when it was time to sell, when it was time to dig in?
Well, first of all, not every business was successful. So I clearly don't have the right answer all the time on that. I think I'd have to say that it's more gut instinct than anything. When I bought the Toyota dealership, it was in 1983. It was a small dealership selling 30 cars a month. When I sold it in 1987, we were the 5th largest Toyota dealership in the world, selling over 1,200 cars a month. There were several things that happened there. First of all, at the time that I bought the Toyota dealership, the big Japanese car, it was called a Datsun 240Z. Datsun later became known as Nissan. But Toyota was building a great car. They just weren't very well known. And for some reason, I thought they had a real future. By 1986, 1987, they were building the best motor car in the world, and the yen was 250 to 1 at that time, so we also had the best pricing. And then the city of Garden Grove, unbelievably, actually developed the very first auto mall. They had this big strip along the Garden Grove freeway, and they wanted the dealers to move out of downtown Garden Grove over to that area, and nobody would do it. They didn't want to be next to the other dealerships. That seemed counterintuitive. But I was such a newbie, and I was able to buy the land so cheap that I could build out the entire new dealership, basically by borrowing the money to do it. And later, the dealers all started to move over there, and there's no question that our growth spurt had a lot to do with that new location. Then you take a look at Pacific National Bank. When I was chairman of the bank, and initially I owned 2% of the bank, and by the time I sold it, I owned 65%. But that was during the time that the savings and loan crisis was occurring. And I thought, you know what? These savings and loans are going down, and there's going to be an opportunity here to buy banking assets cheap. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. You may remember that the government decided they'd have good banks and the bad banks. Then the good banks, they'd take out all the bad loans, and you would buy the location, and you'd buy all of the deposits in that location. So we were able to grow rapidly there. And then finally, I have to mention Chateau, our hotel in France. As you and I have talked about before, it's 1,000 years old in a medieval village. Sits on top of a 1,300-foot mountain that comes directly out of the Med. When I bought that hotel in 1989, I bought it on the basis of hotel rooms and a 45-seat Michelin star restaurant. But we had these magnificent decks that the Prince of Monaco has been quoted in magazines saying is his favorite view of the Côte d'Azur. It's like you're in a helicopter over Cap Ferrat and the Côte d'Azur. And I saw the decks as an entirely new business opportunity that really wasn't fully being taken care of. Now, between May and 1st of May and the end of September, we serve 55,000 people there, because as is the second most visited village in all of France, 55,000 people, an average of 22 euros a person, because they buy ice cream, a glass of wine, a Coke, whatever it might be. And the cost of sales is about 7%. So you take 55,000 times 22 euros and figure we got a 7% cost of goods, and it's turned out to be an amazing profit center that had nothing to do with the original purchase. But I've missed it. I've missed a number of them in my career as well. So those are three of the ones that I saw and were able to take advantage of. There have been a number of others where I thought I saw something that didn't materialize the way I hoped it would.
So you've made a lot of successful investments.
Yeah.
But could you share maybe one of your biggest, we'll call it mistakes or failures, and maybe how you were able to either rebound from that or learn from that?
Well, I try to forget about those as fast as I can, but since you brought it up.
We're going to open up old wounds then.
I can tell you two. And actually, it's interesting, I think, because I spent a lot of time evaluating both these things. One was my best business idea. Out of all the companies I had, this was the best idea. It was called Physicians Capital Group, and it dealt with the collection of funds for doctors, especially in a hospital setting. And we spent a lot of money on that company. I put $20 million in it, raised another 20. We were perfectly situated. Everything looked ideal. We had $76 million worth of contracts in hand with hospitals. And then we ran into the teeth of the 2008-2009 financial crisis and Obamacare. And most people aren't aware of it, but hospitals were losing 19 cents on every dollar on Medicare and Medicaid patients before Obamacare. After Obamacare, that went up to 37 cents. And that was so dramatic that they, and rightfully so, they began to exit or parachute out of contracts that they had because they just simply couldn't afford it at that time. So then I had to decide if I'm going to keep, because everybody else's technology is growing rapidly, and we either had to keep up, but without those contracts, which means we had to put another 30 or 40 million in it or close the doors, and I decided to close the doors. It was very, very painful. The other one is I had a friend in Seattle. This was in the mid to late 1980s. And he called me and said, listen, this is the deal of a century, Terry. You've got to get in it. There's this company they're putting together up here, and they're going to sell coffee. They're going to have coffee houses all over the place, and definitely going to be in the United States. They want to go worldwide. They're going to have flavored coffees. Coffee's going to be $1.50 a cup. And I thought that was the dumbest idea I'd ever heard of. For me, because I grew up in an era where, to me, a coffee house was where Maynard G. Krebs on the Dobie Gillis show, if you maybe you're too young to even remember that, and it sounded like a ridiculous idea, and so I just didn't follow up on it at all, and probably missed out on what might have been one of the best opportunities I could have. But here's what I learned from it: the Starbucks deal, I can now say I should have. That was a should have. The PCG situation was shouldn't have. Now, even though I lost $20 million on PCG, I didn't lose anything, I just didn't get anything out of Starbucks. I feel worse about the Starbucks deal because to say I should have meant that I wasn't smart enough to see it. I was too lazy to investigate it. I wasn't courageous enough to take the step. Should have, to me, is a personal failure on my part. Shouldn't have means I tried. I did everything I could. It didn't work out, but there's lessons in failure as well. And so, to be honest with you, I'd rather live with shouldn't have than should have.
Got it. So if you could go back, you can't, but if you could go back and do a few things over, what, if anything, would you do differently?
My personal life. The truth is, I became so enamored with business, wanted to be an international businessman. A lot of things I did are international. I became a workaholic. There's no question it cost me my first marriage. It's caused me some difficulty in my second marriage. And I don't blame either lady. They've been terrific ladies. They'd just like to have their husband home more often. And I wasn't very good at figuring out how to balance that until probably I got into my 50s. Then I learned by then I had learned some lessons and I began to figure out how to do it. But if I could go back and do it again, I would have tried to have been much more willing to allow my personal life to have some of the sort of personal family loving successes that I had in my business career.
No, I think that's a great reflection, and thank you for sharing that. So, this is where I always ask a question of advice. What advice would you have for a first-time entrepreneur that wants to succeed on their first venture? What would you tell them?
You know, there's the two words that come up for me are fearlessness and failure. First of all, fearlessness. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a bit of fearlessness. Now, please, to everybody out there, I don't want them to confuse that with being stupid. Okay, the idea is to be on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge. You can be fearless, but be careful about what you do. You can be fearless and not be stupid. But that's a key. If you have too much of a fear factor, you're probably not going to do well as an entrepreneur. The second thing is failure is really your friend. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but all of the most important life and business lessons that I've learned from failure. When things are going well, I have a tendency to consider myself, I start feeling bulletproof and like everything's going to be great. And that's about when you'll take one to the heart. And most of the time, the great moments of reflection happen through a failure. Now, the key, though, is don't get stuck there. Listen, you fail, it hurts. It hurts a lot. And it should hurt a lot. And you should do a lot of self-reflection. And you should take a look at what went wrong and how you can avoid that in the future. But don't get stuck there. Feel the hurt. Know what that feels like. Know that you don't like it, and now get off it. Pick yourself up, get moving, get back in the game.
And learn.
Yep.
I think that's great insights and great advice for our young entrepreneurs that might be watching the show. Terry, I want to thank you for being on the show today. You're going to come back and help us with our Q&A. We're going to have both of our guests on for that.
Okay.
So we'll be right back with that. And now it's time for a featured segment of the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Today there are more than 400 million entrepreneurs around the world. That means that 1 in every 18 persons owns a business. But the average founder's salary is less than $55,000 a year, and they average 66 hours of work per week. So while most entrepreneurs have dreams of success and riches, the vast majority work hard and get paid very little. And now it's time for today's Leadership Countdown. Today's show is all about entrepreneurs and the decisions they make. So we bring you the top 5 reasons why people start their own business. Starting with the number 5 reason. Number 5 is legacy. Starting your own business will allow you to leave your footprint on the world. Number 4 reason is choice. When you start your own business, you get to handpick the people with whom you want to work. Number 3 reason to start your own business is control. Entrepreneurs have total control over decision-making, and for some people, that responsibility is highly desirable. And the number 2 reason is flexibility. As an entrepreneur, you are your own boss, so you can set your direction and hours and make things mold to the way you want your life to be. And the number 1 reason to start your own business is money. If your business is a success, the opportunity to exponentially improve your personal wealth is undeniable. And those are the 5 reasons why entrepreneurs start their own business. Please stick around. We have Tom Sims in the studio, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and the Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, is what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership, really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field. They have deep knowledge and research, but also aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to The Leadership Voice. Our next guest today is Tom Sims. Tom was born in Chicago in 1948 and raised in West Los Angeles, California. He attended Loyola High School in Los Angeles and studied mechanical engineering at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He began working in the restaurant business with his father, Arthur J., in Hollywood, California, opening his first restaurant, the French Marketplace, in 1974. Shortly thereafter, he purchased the Kettle in Manhattan Beach and a group of small restaurants in Orange County, California. In 1978, Tom and his partners opened their first Mimi's Café in Anaheim, California, not far from Disneyland. Over the next 20 years, they developed over 100 Mimi's across the country, until selling the company in 2004. He remains involved in the restaurant world through his sons, Chris and Mike, who have created Lazy Dog Restaurants, Simsies, and multiple fine dining establishments in Manhattan Beach, California. And now, it is with great pleasure that I welcome to the Leadership Voice super entrepreneur Tom Sims.
Hello, Jay. How are you?
Great.
Thank you for this opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you for being on the show, Tom. It's great to have you. We met a couple years ago at the Lazy Dog Leadership Summit, and
Yes.
back then I had in my mind that maybe someday we'd find the right opportunity to have you on the show.
Well, we talked about it at lunch that day, and wasn't that a great summit? Mm-hmm. That was terrific.
That's right. So I had it up here, we talked about it, and now here we are.
Super.
Perfect. So maybe we could talk a little bit about your career journey and how you eventually created, developed, grew, and sold Mimi's.
Well, Jay, when I was in college, I had no intention of being in the restaurant business. I was an engineer. I was an aeronautical engineer, and I always wanted to be involved in aerospace and aviation. But when I graduated in 1970, the country was at war and it was in recession, and I was unable to find a job. So my father, Arthur J., had been in the restaurant business and had a couple of restaurants. And I called him and I said, I can't find a job, and I need an emergency. I need a job to keep me going here until I find out what's going to happen to me. So he gave me and I started working for him in one of his restaurants. And in the aviation industry didn't get a heck of a lot better, but I realized in a year or two that I liked the restaurant business. So I said to him one day, I said, do you think I can open a restaurant? And he said, absolutely. He says, you can do anything you want if you really want to do it. And I said, I'd like to give it a shot. So he helped me out. And he signed a banknote for me. And I opened the first restaurant in Hollywood in 1974. I didn't know the business very well, but I think I survived more through energy and enthusiasm than I did through knowledge. And we were very fortunate, and it worked. That enabled me to actually, over the next few years, to open some other restaurants and actually move our offices to Orange County. Well, in the late 1970s, if you remember, in 1979, our inflation rate was 13%, and our interest rates were 18%. And our cafes that we had were good restaurants, they were good businesses, but they certainly couldn't afford the real estate at inflated prices, and they couldn't afford interest rates at 18%. So I said, well, how are we going to continue to build a company? Well, we're going to have to change the concept. And that's where Mimi's Café came in. We said, why don't we take the cafes that we have and overlay them with a dinner house concept, take all the qualities of high-end dinner houses and overlay our cafe with them and create this hybrid restaurant. And that'll do much more business than we're doing in our businesses right now. And hopefully that'll entitle us to be able to afford the interest rates and the real estate. Well, we were very fortunate. And the first one we opened in Anaheim in 1979, it worked. The volumes were higher, and we had success, and we were able to pay our interest on our first bank loan, which was 22%. Wow. But we made it, and we were actually able to build a couple more. And by the time we had built 2 or 3 of Mimi's, we knew we had something. And we said, we can actually develop these and build more. So we started looking around Southern California. We said, can we go to the San Fernando Valley? Can we go to the Inland Empire? Can we go here? Can we go? And we started building restaurants in Southern California, and they worked. So then we said, well, now we're in Southern California. I wonder if we could go outside of Southern California. So we went to Northern California, which originally was very tough for us. I made some decisions that weren't the greatest, and from lack of experience, but I learned from my mistakes, and we eventually had a very successful group of restaurants in Northern California. Then we went to Nevada, Las Vegas, and Reno. Then we went to Arizona. We went to Texas. We went to Florida. We went up to Georgia, Virginia, and we built restaurants across the country until the early 2000s. And in 2004, I had an opportunity to sell the company. And I made a personal decision. I said I'd been about 20, 25 years building that company. And I said, maybe it's time for me to move on and do something else. We had a great group of people who were running the company, and they didn't need me. They were doing a beautiful job. And I said, time for me to go. So I sold the company to a restaurant group from the East Coast. And then, once I had done that, then I pulled back, and we have 2 sons, Chris and Mike. And they had decided that they wanted to try their hand at the restaurant business. So from a back seat, from a distance, I gave them a hand to get started. And they, through their efforts, have been successful in their businesses. So now, as you mentioned, Chris has the Lazy Dog restaurants, which he is now growing across the country. And Mike has his restaurants based in Manhattan Beach, which he has along the coast of California. So it's been good to us. Business has been good to us. Life has been good to us. We're very grateful.
So in all of this time with growing and expanding and going too fast, going too slow, was there ever a time when you thought it wasn't, it was not going to make it? Was there a time when you thought?
Well, when we opened the first restaurant, when I opened my first restaurant, I didn't know what I didn't know. And and at times I thought this may not work. In fact, I had 2 good friends tell me, that's the most foolish thing I've ever seen you do, is open this restaurant. And they told me I was going to fail, but we didn't. We didn't. The restaurant was accepted. In fact, it became popular, and so that worked. And then when we got to that next stage, when interest rates were high, I said, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go with our company? How are we going to grow? How am I going to grow? We had to re-engineer it with Mimi's and start Mimi's. And then every time we went to a new market, I'd scratch my head and I'd say, well, the odds are on our side, but there's still a lot of risk. And just nothing's for sure. And we're not always right. But we'll just see how it goes. And luckily, we made a lot more good decisions than we made poor decisions.
No, that's great. So can you share some of the most key decision points that you faced during this time?
One was,
and maybe how you made those decisions.
Yeah, well, normally it was circumstances that caused us to change. I think one thing that I learned, when we learned, is that when you make a plan, when you make a strategic plan for 3 years or 5 years, the one thing you can be sure of is that it will change.
Yeah.
Things won't work exactly the way you had it figured. Economies change, circumstances change, things change. And so you have to be, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, you have to be adaptive. You have to be able to adapt to changing circumstances. And that's really what causes us as restaurant people and leaders to move to a different direction, to change the concept, to adjust things, to go here and not there, and to decide what concept's good today, because the business is always changing, constantly changing, and people are always competing with you and trying to take your business.
So how do you know when it's time to pull the trigger?
Well, generally, it's either, for me, it was either a business decision where we had, if we were going to continue to grow, we had to move, we had to do something else. Or if we were having problems in a particular area, we had to make a change. And so it was caused by the circumstances. But in other cases, when I sold the company, that was a personal decision. And sometimes your life is a blend of your business and your family and personal things. And that was a personal decision.
So could you talk about the role that failure has played in your career?
Well, I think one of the things, if you're going to be a leader and if you're going to be running a company, you've got to realize that you're always going to be taking risk. If you're going to grow, you're going to be taking risk. Some people like to take this much risk, and some people like to take that much risk. It all depends how much you could take. And what we tried to call it was calculated risk. We would say, okay, here's the risk. It could fail, but we'll do due diligence and we'll study it and we'll prepare for it so that at least we get the odds on our side. And so if we fail, it's not for lack of knowledge. It's for fail, the decision wasn't right. But at least we were prepared.
You know, so you have to be willing to take risks, but you have
Correct.
to also understand how much tolerance you even have.
That's absolutely correct. And I think that you have to always respect failure, but you cannot fear it.
That's great. So if you were talking to a young entrepreneur just ready to start their own business, they're all excited and eager, what advice would you give an aspiring person that has their sights set on starting their own business?
Well, I think if I were doing this, there's several things that are important to starting a new business. But if I were doing this over and starting from scratch, the things that I would want and the things that I would do was that, first of all, I would decide what business, what is it? What business is it? Is it a tech business? Is it a restaurant? Is it design? What business are you interested in? What do you love? What do you really feel passion for? What business do you want to be in? And then I always tell guys and girls, I say, well, who is the best company out there? Who has the best product that you really like? Who has the iconic brand for the kind of business you'd like to be in? And they would always give me a name. And I'd say, good, go to work for them. Go do your graduate program. You graduated from college. Do a graduate program for 3 years working for that company and learn everything there is to know about that company, the product, why it works, their culture, so on and so forth. I said, learn your business, and then once you had some knowledge of your business, then find a mentor or two. Find a mentor or two that have been there, who can help you with your business plan, can help you develop your process, and can help you work through the early years of getting your business started. I think that's what I would do.
So really have a clear sense of what kind of business you want to be in, and
yes,
and
definitely pick it and say that's what I want to do.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you, Tom, for being on the show today and sharing your wisdom. We're going to come back and do some Q&A because we do have questions from our viewers in just a few minutes. So you'll stay with us for that, right?
Great-o.
Terrific. It's now time for a featured segment of the show. It's the leadership example. Not all entrepreneurs are successful all the time. Even the best have had to overcome adversity. Today we bring you 10 well-known millionaires that also have overcome filing for bankruptcy. Hear that? You know what that means. It's time for today's leadership lesson. Today's lesson is being delivered by Professor Lorenzo Bizzi. So let's take 3 minutes to learn about the strategic choices of entrepreneurs.
Hello, I am Lorenzo Bizzi, and today's leadership lesson revolves around a key topic: entry barriers for a startup today in the USA. Is it easier or more difficult to start a business in the USA today? Well, there's both good news and bad news. Good news is that the barriers for a startup in the USA today have significantly lowered, making it much easier for a startup to enter a market. The number one barrier for a startup has always been access to capital. You want to start a business, but it is difficult to find money from investors or to get support from a bank. However, access to capital has significantly increased in the USA, and it is much easier to find investors in the US than it is in most other countries in the world. Access to distribution or access to suppliers, which are other traditional barriers for startups, have also significantly lowered. Access to distribution has incredibly improved, and through online channels such as Amazon, everyone can easily sell products. Access to suppliers is much easier too, again thanks to online platforms. Alibaba, for example, allows anyone to get easy access to manufacturers in China to produce products designed in the USA and to ship them here, where you can distribute them anywhere you want. Economies of scale have also decreased in many businesses. A lot of businesses today are not asset intensive, meaning that you do not need to spread high fixed costs on large volume before being able to see profit. So if the good news is that barriers are lower and it is easier for a startup to enter business today, what is the bad news? The barriers are lower and it is easier for a startup to enter a business today. In fact, lower entry barriers means higher amount of new startups entering a business, and therefore higher competition and more difficulty to establish and maintain competitive advantage. A lot of my students come to me and tell me they want to start a smartphone app business because it's easy to enter. Well, the Apple App Store receives 50,000 requests for new apps per month. So what does this mean? It means that it is easier to get in and more difficult to make money once you're in. What should you do? You should enter a business only if you have solid evidence, then you can build an advantage over your competitors, and then you can sustain that advantage by not allowing your competitors to imitate what you're doing. Unfortunately today, access to information, capital, suppliers, and distributor makes it easy also for incumbent companies to imitate your business idea. So lower entry barriers does not mean that you should think less about entering a business because it's easier, but you should actually think more before entering a business. I am Lorenzo Bizzi, and this has been your leadership lesson.
Thank you, Professor Bizzi, for that insightful leadership lesson. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Q&A. Viewers, do you need some leadership advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show we take questions from you, our viewers, and we answer them right here on the show. Today we have 4 questions for our guests, so let's get to our Q&A. Our first question is for Terry Giles, and it comes from Roger in Long Beach, California. Roger asks, What was the biggest mistake you made in business, and what did you learn from it?
Well, that's easy for me to answer. It was selling Pacific National Bank. I actually loved the bank. I loved being bank chairman. Some of the other things I did, car salesman, criminal defense attorney, on the list of most respected professions, it kind of comes after garbage men. And so bank chairman, I really liked. And I enjoyed the bank immensely. I loved loan committee and going through other people's loan portfolios and what they were doing in business. It was exciting. And U.S. Bank offered us a lot of money, or I thought it was at the time, and I decided to sell it, and I've regretted it ever since.
Jay, I have a similar story. At the time when I sold Mimi's, I thought I did the right thing. But in the later years, I realized if I had to do it again, I wouldn't have sold it. Like I said, it was a personal decision. I just wanted to try do other things. But the company that I sold it to changed the most important thing in the company, and that was the culture. And when they changed the culture of the company, they started having some challenges. And I don't miss the business part of it, but there were so many great people in that company, and there still are, that I felt personally responsible to many of those people for what changes the new owner made.
Well, it sounds when you describe that, exactly that, it sounds a lot like if you could go back and do it differently, you probably would have held on to Mimi's.
Yes.
And if you had gone back, you would have held on to Pacific. So the biggest mistakes each of you talk about are when you let go of something that you wish you had actually held on to.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So our second question it's for Tom Sims, and it comes from Huang in Costa Mesa, California. Huang asks, who do you believe was the person that helped you most in your success?
Well, in my mind, there's no doubt about it. The most important person in my business career was my father. Because he's the one who said to me, and he's the one that encouraged me and said, you can do this. He said, go do it. And I think that came from his days in the military, right?
Yep.
He said, you'd be surprised what you can do when you have to do it. And he said, so go do it. And so definitely, he was the guy who was my biggest mentor, my best mentor.
That's great. Terry?
Well, I'm jealous when I hear Tom talk about that because it sounds like he had a great father. Unfortunately, I grew up without my father being around. But it was definitely my mentors. And I had mentors up into my 40s and 50s. As I would get into a new business, I've always been fortunate to have somebody who really understood that business, who was willing to take me under their wing and to help me. And without that help, there's no question that I would not have experienced anything close to the success that I had. Those people who reach out and assist. It's one of the reasons now that I've reached a point where I'm not working as hard, where I'm more than willing to talk to young people and try to give them the encouragement that others gave me.
I think that's great, and I think the commitment to mentoring and to leaving a legacy is a really purposeful and valuable mission to embrace.
Well, I think, and it makes you feel good. It makes me feel good being able to talk to some people and say, hey, maybe you should try this or try that.
Oh, that's great. So our third question is for Terry Giles, and it comes from Madison in Victorville, California. Madison asks, some people are better off working for a company, and others are better off starting their own business. What do you think separates the two?
Well, let me first of all say that I think tolerance for risk and tolerance for work are two important things one has to consider if they're going to be an entrepreneur. If you're not comfortable with risk, probably not a good career choice. And and by the way, there's nothing wrong with 9 to 5 and having a great family life and doing all those things. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, especially when you're starting out a new business, it's pretty much 24/7. If you think you might be uncomfortable walking the floor Thursday night wondering how you're going to make payroll on Friday morning, or if you're worried about how many weeks of vacation you're going to have each year, probably being an entrepreneur is something you might want to put off. So I think it deals with the tolerance that an individual has for risk and also for work. Also, some people, I wasn't one, some people are natural organizers from the standpoint of being a chief operations officer in a company. In every company, there's a certain amount of just grinding it out, doing the same thing. Once you get your processes in line, it's making sure everyone's doing the same thing day in and day out, doing it well, but doing the same thing. And there are folks that are really, really good at that. And generally, they are best working for another company and going in and operating that company. I was not good at that. I knew I wasn't good at that. And so my talents were more in sort of seeing what something could be and then trying to help get it there and get the right people to help me get it there.
So it definitely helps to know what your strengths are.
That's right.
Well, I definitely have to agree that you have to be number one. You went 2 for 2. You have to be totally committed to what you're doing. I mean, you have to be 24/7. You can't just be involved. You've got to be committed to making it work. And you have to understand that there is risk involved, and you have to accept the fact that there's risk and that you could fail, and that has to be okay. Mm-hmm. And you have to have the confidence that you through your personal abilities can overcome that, and can make things work. So that's it. And if you don't like those, if you're not comfortable there, then you probably isn't the field for you.
Well, those are some words to live by from 2 very successful entrepreneurs. Our 4th question is for Tom, and it comes from Kevin in Fountain Valley. Tom asks, what do you think is the key to success for any or most businesses?
Well, there's several parts to having a successful business. But when I think about it, for me, clearly the most important thing to have in a successful business is your culture. Is your set of values, your ethics, your accountability, your velocity. What is it? What is the glue that holds the company together? And what is your culture? A strong culture, one built on growth, one built on personal growth for each of the people in the company, is a culture that is healthy, and it's based upon success for everybody. So I think culture is the most important thing, having a great culture.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that is one of the keys to a successful business, because you also talk about when you sold Mimi's, one of the first things they did, or one of the things they eventually did, is they changed the culture. And in a way, when they bought Mimi's, maybe they didn't realize what they were really buying was not just the restaurant, but they were buying a culture.
Well, it was interesting. Our culture, part of our culture was that every decision we made in our business, today it's the same truth. Every business decision we make has to be good. What's best for the guest? What's best for the customer? So whatever we do, it has to go back. Is the customer going to benefit from that? If the customer is not going to benefit from that, then don't do it. Well, what happened was, one of the things that happens is sometimes when you sell a company, the buyers decide that the bottom line is more important than what's best for the customer. Mm-hmm. And that is that fundamental change in the culture.
So they start saying, we can cut costs here. We
can cut costs. You
edge
really
this,
don't need that. You guys really didn't need all that. You can do it with this, and you can do that. And the next thing you know, the customer isn't getting the treatment they used to get. They're accustomed to. And guests are smart. People get it. They pick up on it.
Okay, great. Terry, what about you? What do you see as the key for any business or most businesses to succeed?
Well, I think Tom said it perfectly, to be honest with you. Culture is the key. And then the only other thing I would add is you have to make sure that the people that you bring into your business, whatever that business may be, fit within that culture. I've had a couple of companies where I thought we had a certain understanding relative to what the culture was going to be. And then I would make a change somewhere, and the person who would come in was in fact messing with the culture without me really being aware of it or knowing about it. And that can be dangerous. All of a sudden, the wrong person can wash away very quickly what has taken you a long time to build up in a company if you're not careful.
That's well stated. He's absolutely right. When you look at people coming into your company, the question we always ask is, does that person fit into our culture? And that's very, very important. You're right.
So when you're on board, when you're bringing people in to join your teams, making sure that they're a good culture fit, that they will represent the culture, represent the core values that really mean the most to your business if you want to have a business that succeeds.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for taking questions from our audience. I think you've given some great pearls of wisdom and shared your experience, so thank you for that. This has been the Leadership Voices Q&A. Thank you to Terry Giles and Tom Sims for helping us with today's Q&A. If you have a question or need advice, send us your questions right here to the Leadership Voice by email, leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu, or by Twitter @CSUF_leadership. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we learned about entrepreneurship and when to make the tough decisions in business. Thank you to our guests, Terry Giles and Tom Sims, for joining us. And a special thank you to Professor Lorenzo Bizzi for delivering today's leadership lesson. Join us each episode of The Leadership Voice as we feature fresh and relevant topics that can help you to become a great leader. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership, here on the beautiful campus of Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on The Leadership Voice.